Hello, dear chess lovers. Today we are starting a new series, perhaps, on chess openings for newbies. I'm starting with this Slav defense today, folks. Slav is characterized by d4, d5, c4, and c6. I will break it down for those beginner players, for those newbies. While doing that, I will talk about chess principles and I will logically break down all the moves to you so you can try to apply it in your games without relying so much on the memorization stage, because you don't need that at that level. But I will just give you the gist and the philosophy of the Slav defense. It's also the defense that I also played with the black pieces for basically all my life. So I also have some experience, like personal experience, to give you today. But also, very importantly, we will ask the why questions today and we'll explain the moves as logical as possible using chess principles, because Slav is one of the most logical defenses out there for black. Extremely logical, principled. Almost every move can be explained by those logical terms. When there are strange looking moves, I will also have a breakdown for you, right? Try to understand why those strange looking moves are played. So again, instead of pure memorization, you try to engage deeply in the whys behind the moves, because that will give you great tool to transfer that knowledge to your games, folks. Okay, so d4, d5. First of all, why d5? Let's start with the why question already on the first move. Why d5? Well, we are placing a pawn in the center. We are fighting for the center. We're also, let's say, activating our bishop, right? After c4, well, c6 is very logical to defend our central pawn. Why not e6, for example? Because e6 is shutting down our bishop. Of course, e6 is also a good move, folks, but it's a Queen's Gambit decline. That's a whole different philosophy. So Slav players, they want to improve on the QGD by keeping their bishop alive on this diagonal, correct? So again, very logical move, c6, keeping the central pawn on d5. Let's first look at this line, knight f3 today. I will show you knight c3 and also combination of these two moves, folks. Okay, knight f3. Well, what is the most logical developing move? Knight f6, yeah? Because you're 100% sure that your knight is going to f6 in its position. So logically, we are playing that move first, while also keeping our bishop active on this diagonal, right? We don't play e6 yet. Let's look at this line first, folks, e3. We'll later also look at the line knight c3 by white. But e3 is very logical. They are keeping an eye on their c4 pawn and also activating their bishop this way. What is the problem with e3? They are limiting their bishop on c1. Okay? So, tell me the most logical move here for black. Before we get our pawn to e6, which move is desirable? Yes, you're a great player if you came up with the move bishop f5, right? That's the spirit of the Slav. We want to get the bishop outside of the pawn chain first and only then play the move e6. You might also call this a reversed London structure, right? Solid, principled, every single piece becomes active this way. So that's the spirit of Slav. That's why we don't go for semi-Slavs with e6, because that's a trouble piece already on c8, right? So again, I can justify the entire philosophy of the opening for black to you this way. Bishop f5 will almost always be a good move unless we are giving cd, cd, and queen b3 to white. I will come back to it later on. If they are not fully developed yet, if the knight is still on b1, for example, then we'll go bishop f5 in this position, because white cannot punish us by taking, and then playing queen b3, right? Because the drawback of moving the bishop from c8 is this pawn on b7 is becoming loose. So again, I can logically explain to you when you should be very careful before playing such logical moves, okay? Bishop f5, knight c3. What should we do? Yes, e6, right? Now we get our beautiful pawn chain going and our bishop is not suffering behind the pawn chain. Our bishop is actually a good piece on f5, correct? And again, we are playing very principled chess, keeping this pawn in the center and limiting white's choices. To justify the entire setup, white usually goes knight h4, because their claim is this. Yes, you got the bishop outside of the pawn chain, but now I will just simply want to exchange your bishop for my knight. That's a logical claim for white, but they won't make their task easy on this trade, okay? So I will offer you to go bishop e4. There are also many moves for black. There's also bishop g6, by the way, but I will offer this tricky line to you, and the opponents will probably take on e4 at this level. And now comes my question, folks. Should we take this way or this way? Traits are always important. It's always good to give yourself choices. And please explain to yourself one of these moves in terms of pawns and pieces. You're a great player, folks, if you came up with the move d takes e4. Why? Because look at the knight on h4. It's as simple as that. By taking with the pawn, you're burying that knight on the edge of the board. The knight on the rim is dim, right? So knight h4, bishop e4 takes, a very recurrent pattern in those Slav structures. And look at the effect of this pawn on that knight. You can learn tremendously about pawns burying pieces patterns by studying such instructive positions, right? And this knight will be forever a liability for white. Already right now, they are facing a threat of g5, trapping that knight. So given that they are facing this threat of g5, they usually go g3, but that's also a time-consuming move. And even this knight goes back to g2 at some point, this will still be a terrible piece. And that's our long-term goal. And that, for example, explains our next operation. We can also go c5 directly, but I also like the move bishop b4, and we are engaging in mass piece trades. We want to exchange the bishops, the queens. Why? Again, why? To limit and isolate the terrible knight for white, right? If the enemy piece is a one terrible piece, then usually trading off everything else, but leaving that piece on the board is a great thing for us, right? Logical terms again. I want you to just form connections. Logical analysis of why those trades are good for black right now. Because you left white with a terrible knight on h4, and the next move is also very nice for black. Very logical move c5. You're freezing that pawn the same color as the bishop. You're striking in the center, and you also want to get your knight to c6 or a6, depending on what white does. Their knight is a terrible piece. Their bishop is also quite stuck in the structure, and if they take on c5, we have many ways to play, but I very much like a5, stopping b4, also getting ready for knight b7 followed by take on c5, folks. And as you can see, white is very limited in terms of space, in terms of bad pieces. And after you take on c5, just look at the position. I will stop here for this line because I want you to evaluate why black is already better in this position because of our better pieces. There's a huge threat of knight takes b3, but never forget one thing, that knight on h4 is a terrible piece. There is no salvation even after knight g2, because we know fianchetto knights in chess are almost always bad, right? They are usually terrible in those fianchetto squares anyways. It can be limited by pawns like g5, for example, and that's our game plan for this entire line. Let's look at the other line, folks. d4, d5, c4, c6. What if they go knight c3 instead of knight f3? That's also a very logical move for white. And again, we will make the most natural developing move first with knight f6. We keep our bishop options alive on that diagonal. And let's look at the line e3, right? First, we looked at knight f3 followed by e3. Now we are looking at knight c3 followed by e3. White wants to defend their pawn on c4 with the drawback of shutting down their bishop on c1, correct? So, which move should we play in this position? Yes, we should not shy away from bishop f5. Bishop f5 is a great move. You can remember like this. It's always a great move if white doesn't develop both of their knights, right? If white chooses the setup, then bishop f5 is a bad move. I will come back to it later on. But already here we should think about logical terms. Bishop f5 is a bad move here because white is developing their army, right? They are gaining this time advantage, developmental advantage. So bishop f5 becomes, let's say, more risky at this moment. But if they don't develop both of their knights, if they play e3 on move 4, right? Then remember, bishop f5 is a great choice for black. We want to simply get the bishop out and get this reversed London formation. What if white tries to punish us with takes and queen b3? That's a stock standard way for white in those structures to punish the early move bishop f5, which is weakening the pawn b7, correct? So here, folks, I don't want you to make a retreating move bishop c8. That would be a chess crime to return back the bishop. Queen b6 doesn't work, unfortunately, because of the stock standard pattern of knight takes d5. You should know your tactical patterns in Slav, because if you take the knight, then white is fine after queen takes d5. They won a central pawn. And if you, after knight takes d5, if you take the queen, then they have this Zwishen check first, followed by a takes b3. And again, white is much better with an extra pawn. Correct? So after queen b3 in this position, we don't go queen b6, But how else are you going to defend this pawn? That's a chess crime to play b6. Don't play this because you're weakening the entire light squares. You're losing time in this position, right? You don't want to play chess like this. So b6 will be a really terrible move, and it just repeats itself at this level. You're giving a time advantage to white, and they will get all these moves in, bishop b5s, and you're suffering on the queen side. No b6, but what is the most desirable positional move for black? Because look at this, white is losing time in the opening with the queen move, right? They are losing time. They're not developing their king side. Every move has a drawback in chess. And what's the way to punish this move queen b3? In other words, should we defend or ditch that pawn on b7? And yes, we are ditching that pawn with a developing move knight c6. Who said Slav is a boring opening? You see dynamism on move 6 already for black. Black is saying, you know what, please take my pawn and lose more time in the process while I'm getting ready to consolidate my position and chase your queen away later on and gaining more time. Look at white's king side. That's an adventurous pawn hunt for white. And next move, you should maybe memorize, because that's maybe difficult to find in actual games. Maybe the only move that you must memorize here, folks, a very strong move, maybe the only move for black, bishop d7. It looks like a strange move at first sight, but once you look deeper, it's very, very logical. You're defending your knight, and you're simply getting ready for the move rook b8, chasing the queen and putting maximum pressure on the queen side, and you're keeping your knight on c6 also to prepare the push e5 in the center of the board. You say you lost so much time, white, and they will pay for that. It's already becoming dangerous for white to play this position. The best move is probably queen b3 back, which is actually kind of strange, right? If they make a developing move, then they can pay for it with move like rook b8, queen a6, knight b4, right? Chasing the queen again, takes, queen takes d7, and already here, right, you can see after queen f5, there are these ideas, knight e2 check, knight e3 check, our queen, our knight, our rook are beautiful, and look at white's development, right? So many sleeping pieces in the white's position, so that's a very interesting position for black to explore. After queen d7, if they go queen b3 here, well, we say the same thing, right? Rook b8, thank you so much for letting our pieces activate with tempo. How many moves did white play with the queen so far? Queen b3, queen takes b7, right? Queen b3 back, and queen d1. What a journey, right? The queen just made 4 moves only to end up on her initial square. Incredible. Chess doesn't work like that, and that was totally worth sacrificing 1 pawn, right? Our pieces are still beautiful. We didn't kill our bishop yet, and comes the next phase. Once the enemy is suffering in terms of development, what do you want to do in chess? Yes, open up the center, strike in the center, and e5 is a great pawn break that fights for the center, that activates our knight, but also activates our bishop, right? Just look how principled we are playing in this position. It's a joy to play this position with the black pieces. Yes, we accept an IQP, but look at our piece activity. Just look at our piece activity and compare them with their white counterparts. They're all sleeping on their barracks here, right? And if white in this position goes greedy and they get 1 more pawn, folks, look at this. If they take on d5, let's analyze this line. That's a very funny line. Takes. Well, they won 1 more pawn, but bishop b4 comes with check. Very logical move, right? We want to develop with a check with tempo. Bishop d2. We take on d2, queen takes, and here comes a very nice move, queen f6, folks. And you see, queen f6 is designed to, well, maybe you tell me. Already after queen f6, there is one little tactical threat we are introducing in this position, folks, right? And if white is oblivious to it, if white plays, let's say, the most natural move, bishop e2, to get ready for development, you tell me our next move. You can stop the video here, folks, and find that tactical shot that makes white pay for their chess crimes. And you're a great player if you looked at this queen, if you looked at this rook, and if you saw the entire sequence of rook takes b2, setting up for the discovered attack, right? Now you see the point of queen f6, knight d3 check, followed by queen takes b2. Discovered attack is working like charm, and black is winning in this position with so much better pieces. Plus, white is still not developed yet, and if you count the material, right, black is a queen for rook and a knight, right? It's already a material advantage for black, but the king is also stuck in the center. There is no coordination in the white's army, and we made them pay for their chess crimes of blindly chasing after pawns. So just go back to this initial position. Let's summarize this lesson, right? Against knight c3 and e3, very importantly, we play the move bishop f5. We don't shy away from making the most natural Slav defense move. We want to get the bishop outside of the pawn chain, okay? If white becomes greedy, if they are asked to, if they basically want us to pay for our early development, then we say keep on developing, right? Keep on developing, and we are avoiding two chess crimes of b6 or bishop c8 or even queen b6 in this position. None of these moves are good. So knight c6 is a move that you need to remember, but I explained to you the whys behind the move, and it will be much easier now for you to remember this idea, right? Bishop d7, again, a very important move to remember, but again, I want you to explain to yourself why this one is great. You don't lose time with moving the knight, and you're setting up for these ideas like rook b8, folks. Queen b3, rook b8 once again. Next move is very logical as well. Chess principles, open up the center, activate our pieces, and get ready for development, improve our knight as well, right? Look at this. And if you compare the piece activity right now, there's a gigantic difference, folks. In this state, white should not chase after more pawns. They should play knight e2, of course, but we keep on developing, right? If they choose to get their knight involved like that, just castle short, and after bishop e2, bishop c6, it's already a good position for black. Again, piece activity side of things is just great. Rook is very active. They can't develop that easily in a position like that. The bishops are sort of eyeing the king side as well, with potential d4s if white's not careful. Rook e8, we can organize even an attack later on, right? On that diagonal and so on with the queen and the bishop. I mean, there's so much potential right now for black to play this middle game position. It's a fun position to play with black anyways, and I want you to take this lesson from this position. And we came to the main line Slav, right? I first showed you those lines that involved early e3 for white, but now they will look at their, let's say, most ambitious attempt. What if white simply develops both of their knights on move 4, right? Now we end up in the main line Slav, and here the next move you should really know, because d takes c4 is a very good move. It looks illogical at first sight. Why are we not making the most natural move here, right? And here I want you to explain to me why this move is bad in this position. Well, it's bad because of the stock standard idea of takes and queen b3, and now they are pressing this pawn, right, plus the pawn on b7, and because white's already developed all of their knights, and because the bishop is still alive on this diagonal, this is premature for us. Bishop f5 was the premature move, because knight c6 is not a good move anymore, right? We cannot really handle the same way, because white will take on b7, and if we choose the same idea, there are a couple of ways for white probably, but bishop f4 is also very logical to me, right? Bishop f4 is a very good move, and they are stopping rook b8 ideas. Then they will get the pawn to e3, and with a beautiful position. Okay, so this is actually quite interesting to compare. The first line was great for us because there was no bishop f4 follow-up after queen b7. Here, this is actually quite bad for us because we can't normally develop our knight. To ask white, basically, to claim that white has lost time in this position, right? We have to make a move as ugly as this in this position, but you don't want to play chess like that, right? You don't want to play chess like that. b6 also is a very bad move for black, weakening all those light squares. So after, you see, that's the problem with bishop f5, folks, because if you do go bishop f5 here, then white is going to play like this, and it's very difficult for us to handle the pressure on these two pawns. So what is the yardstick? What is the cue from the environment that signals to us that bishop f5 is wrong? The cue is this: white is good development, the bishop is also active. They have not yet played the move e3. So maybe you can combine these two things. If they go e3 at some point, bishop f5 is usually a good move. If they haven't played e3 yet, don't play bishop f5. Take on c4. Why? And now we are coming to the why question, folks. First of all, by taking on c4, you sort of ask them that they haven't played e3 yet, so it will take time for them to get back the pawn. And in many lines, we can actually defend our extra pawn with the move b5 and basically claim that we have an extra pawn. It will be difficult for white to take the pawn back, okay? For example, if they go e3 to get the pawn back, we go b5, And it's not an easy way. There's not an easy way for white to get the pawn back. We will make them pay for that. Okay? That's already the first sort of point of d takes c4. I can show you some lines here, but that's not so relevant right now. The important thing is this. D takes c4 is not like a terrible move because we will ask them to get their pawn back. And if there is no easy way to get the pawn back, then it might also need to spend so much time, right, to consolidate this position. dc4 is a very good move. If they go e4, that by the way exists, is a Geller gambit, we go b5 anyways. And again, it's a very sharp middle game position, but we have this extra pawn on c4, which is by the way also hindering white's development. You see, I want you to first perceive this pawn not like a random extra pawn, but that pawn actually hinders white's development. That's a good pawn to have actually, okay? And even we can get the bishop to b7 at some point, followed by c5 and so on. So it won't be that easy for white to claim compensation in a position like this. So dc4, what is the second point of dc4? First of all, by going dc4, you're inducing the pawn move a4, because that's the only way for white to get their pawn back as soon as possible. But a4 is a time-losing move. They're losing time in the opening. Plus, they are weakening the square b4. You see it, folks, right? The b4 has become an outpost after a4. So that also justifies the move dc in its position. dc also takes away queen b3 ideas from white, right? Also stops cd queen b3 ideas. I'm just telling you all the good things about this move dc in this position, so you don't shy away from making these moves, okay? After a4, what is our next move? I want you to stop the video and tell me what is the correct move for black. Yes, principled move, developing move that also fights for the central square e4. And this structure is all about the center, right? Center being these four squares, of course, right? By playing the bishop to f5, we are stopping e4 and we are getting ready for the move e6. Extremely logical play for white, and that's a Slav defense in a nutshell for you. It's so easy to understand, logical to play, and I can describe all these ideas to you in layman terms. e3 is the only way for white to get the pawn back. The drawback being now the bishop is shut down, right? And after e6, a very logical move, getting the bishop outside. Bishop c4, what's the next move? What's the move that fights for the center? Yes, bishop b4 is fighting for the center by pinning that knight who is fighting for the center, right? You see the connection between this developing move and the central control for black, because this knight is the piece that is controlling those two squares, and by pinning that piece, by placing our bishop on an outpost, we are directly fighting for those central squares. Extremely logical play for black. If you look at the black pieces, all of them are happy. There's no bad piece in our camp, and that justifies this setup for black. Castles, right? What can be more natural? Queen 2, knight e7. Very logical developing move as well. This knight controls e5 and c5 and supports our breaks of e5 or c5 later on as well, right? That's the ideal setup for black in this Slav formation. e4, yes, they can push e4, but our bishop will be a good piece on g6. By the way, you can also go to g4 here. There are a couple of good moves, but bishop g6 is a very logical move. The bishop keeps an eye on that central square, and now we have a threat, right? The threat is this. I will take your knight, followed by taking on e4. So white needs to do something in this position, and they usually go e5 in this position, okay? If they go e5, what's the problem of e5? They are giving us this juicy d5 square, right? Our knight is of course going to d5, and we get a good knight on d5. Well, if they take on d5, we take back with the c pawn, of course, to hit the bishop, but also open the c file for our pieces, right? Bishop d3. We can take the bishop in this position, and here you need to know this position, folks. It looks like a simple recapture with the queen. In fact, white creates a threat in this position. I want you to stop the video here and tell me that threat. What would they do if you don't make a move right now? Okay? This is a pattern you must know in Slav, in the classical Slav. Folks, you're a great player if you solve their threat of knight g5. Knight g5 would force a concession on the king side because they're hitting h7. We don't want to play g6 as black, right? Because that will weaken so many dark squares around our king. So you're actually facing a threat of knight g5, and this is why the main moves are either h6 or bishop e7. The bishop is no longer doing anything on this square, so bishop e7 is also a very logical move that you're fighting against the move knight g5. And if given time, you will get your pieces on the queen side like this. Knight to c6, rook to c8, and the game is beautiful on the queen side for us. For example, knight e1, if they want to, let's say, go for this idea of f4, f5, you have this beautiful Slav idea, more than later on, knight b8. Because look, your knight is suffering here. Your knight is a bad piece, and you see the weak pawn on d4, and you improve your knight to a beautiful spot to put pressure on d4, right? It's as simple as that, in fact. And after this, bishop d2, rook c8, there's already a big threat white is facing. If white is careless, if they play a normal move like this, or random move, you take on d4, folks, right? You see it. Takes and bishop c5. I'm showing you those tactical ideas because that's very important in those structures. So after rook c8, in fact, black has no major problems. We can play this position in multiple different ways, and we are definitely okay. Our king is very, very safe as long as you're stopping knight g5s. If you're careless against this idea, if you make it like a normal move, for example, rook c8, right? Then white will do knight g5, folks. And you see, there's a gigantic threat on h7, and you don't want to play g6 because then in white moves like this, queen h3, forces h5, even give white to play moves like this, right? You don't want to end up in a position like that. Your king will be shattered on that side of the board. So again, I'm explaining to you in logical terms why those moves are played. And sense of danger is very important in those Slav structures. Folks, in this series we are talking about beginners, newbies, so I don't want to overwhelm you so much with showing you so many lines that you must memorize. We have to take a step back and ask ourselves what we learned in today's episode so far. I will probably make other videos, continuation videos of this one. This was just the first one to give you the entire spirit and the first ideas of this very logical opening, the Slav defense. The idea is to keep it solid, fight for the center, and don't give up on our aims of getting the bishop outside of the pawn chain. But there are signals for us to understand when is the right time for that. And the signal is if white goes e3 on move 4. Okay? Then it's a great time for us to get the bishop outside the pawn chain. If white plays normally, normal moves, right? For example, bishop b3, we will basically take and we'll get our knight to d7, bishop to d6, let's say, or bishop to b4 sometimes, and get our king to safety and play for e5 or c5 breaks with a very solid structure. We have no bad pieces and we are fighting for the center. Everything is fine and solid, right? If white goes knight h4, the first thing to remember, bishop e4 induces this interesting exchange, and that knight is suffering, right? We can always try to trick the players, positionally speaking, right? This level, it can be quite useful for you to know these patterns. And if they go knight c3 on move 4, let's look at that line, folks. Yeah, in here, if they go knight c3 on move 3, then we still don't give up our aims of going bishop f5 as long as they do play 3 bishop f5, and we don't shy away from this idea. Why? Because white's pieces are sleeping on the king side. But the move you need to remember is active, developing move knight c6. And suddenly the Slav contains so much fireworks for black. It becomes so beautiful to play. We show our piece activity in compensation for only a single pawn. And we say, you know what? Chess doesn't work like that. And please treat this position nicely, carefully. And, well, black's play is so natural. After moves like queen f6, already hinting at some ideas like this, white is already suffering terribly in a position like that. You can even castle short followed by rook d8. Every single piece is beautiful for black, and that's a great game for black overall to explore and train against your training partners, or you can try it in your games. And finally, if they choose this setup of developing both of their knights without e3, then we should not play bishop f5, and we should know why it gets punished, but we should take on c4 with all the beautiful ideas that come with it, right? And again, we don't shy away from our beautiful setup of bishop f5, e6, bishop b4, because that's the perfect setup to fight for the center. We are making it as difficult as it gets for white to push e4 in this position, while also developing our pieces and securing our king. And even in this position, there is great security to our king. There are different ways for black to play. Also for white, they can maybe sometimes play this and so on. But I will talk about these structures in more depth in my future videos. This was the great first start. And please give me feedback on this. Are you a Slav player yourself? Do you play this opening yourself? What are your thoughts about this? Do you think that's an opening that favors beginners? To me, it's actually quite logical to understand and apply the ideas. The why questions are quite easier to explain to yourself. That's also the opening I chose myself as black. I can maybe show you some of my own victories later on in this series. But that's my idea for this opening course, folks, for beginners, like opening course, opening video for newbies, basically. Just let me know how it goes, right? Just please give me some feedback on YouTube. How you like this video? Do you want me to continue this series with maybe some other openings and so on? And I'm here to help you improve your chess game. And please give me a like and subscribe also if you like this video, folks. I will catch you on the next one. Bye.